Hello, my name is Stephanie and I am a counseling psychology PhD student and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to be presenting on Asian values, family stressors, collectivistic coping, and depression among Asian Americans. So family relationships are really essential and at the core of Asian American culture and have been found to serve as both a risk and a protective factor impacting mental health. Specifically referring to depression or depressive symptoms, which have been shown to be prevalent among Asian American adults. So there are some stressors that can contribute to depression for Asian Americans, being family stressors, and they're related to these underlying cultural values, which I will explain shortly. But one family stressor is perfectionism, and for this presentation, I'm really referring to the family discrepancy related to perfectionism, which is described as the degree to which a person perceives themselves as failing to meet their family's high standards. So this is really looking at the negative aspects of perfectionism, and this has been associated with depression in past studies. So this can relate to the Asian cultural value of family recognition through achievement, where perhaps family, or you might have heard the term of like tiger mom, they may have these high expectations to achieve and perform well, not only academically but occupationally, and just overall being successful in life. So, and then also referring to the tiger mom stereotype, though, also they're often parents, being the mom is oftentimes thought of being more dissatisfied with their child's performance and also more likely to use an authoritarian style of parenting. But another stressor is also family conflict, which really entails acculturation differences related to this incongruence of the cultural beliefs and values and behaviors. So studies have shown how Asian American young adults perceive their parents oftentimes as being more controlling and less affectionate. So this again can also relate to that tiger mom type parent or stereotype, and then which has been related to increases in family conflict. So, again, just those differences in how family members are assimilating and how much they are abiding to some of these cultural values that each of them are having. But then on the other hand, having strong collectivistic values can also affect coping strategies, such as seeking support from family or forbearance. So while there is emphasis on these strong family units and maintaining interpersonal harmony, which can encourage an individual to reach out to their family members and keeping kind of any concerns within the family, there's also this value of conforming to norms and then also being able to control and resolve one's emotions, which may then discourage someone from seeking help outside of the family. And that's really referring to this coping strategy of forbearance, which really means minimizing or concealing your problems to avoid troubling or burdening others. So research has examined these impacts of forbearance, which have been contradictory. So they have found that bottling up your emotions could lead to experiencing more psychological issues, but then there have also been studies that have found no impact or even predicted fewer depressive symptoms, because this specific coping strategy relates well with, like I said, these cultural values that Asian Americans may have. So in addition to this contradiction, there's also been no studies that have looked at how collectivistic coping strategies are related to family perfectionism, family conflict, and depression specifically. So those stressors impacting depression and then their effectiveness. So this study is so that kind of led me to this study and why more exploration is needed here. So the study is grounded in the stress diathesis model and the coping process theory. So when I talk about the stress diathesis theory, this is really referring to the theory that mental illness is occurring because due to the interaction of stressful situations from one's environment and their predispositional vulnerability. And here, the stressful situations are referring to these family dynamics or these family interactions that are causing stress to someone. And then the coping process is referring to how we solve issues and manage or reduce that stress after a difficult situation. And these strategies that we're using are influenced not only by how we perceive the event and the level of stress or how we interpret it and what it means to us, but also the individual and how their culture and cultural values may impact the specific coping strategy that they might use. So the purpose of this study was to really determine the impact of individual pressures from the family and family conflict on depression, and then also looking at the moderating effects of Asian coping on the relationship between these specific stressors and depression. So this study used a cross-sectional design, and participants were recruited through email listservs. So we reached out to like the Asian American Psychological Association or different divisions under APA, like Division 17 and Division 45, used social media platforms and snowball sampling so that we could get a broad participant pool of Asian and Asian Americans living in the U.S., and they were asked to complete a survey through Qualtrics. So due to missing data, the demographic information and our analyses here are based on a sample of 152 Asian and Asian Americans in the U.S. with a mean age of 34.68, and more than half of our participants were women. And when we disaggregated by ethnicity, almost half of our participants identified as Chinese, but as you can see, we had participants of many different Asian ethnicities. And more than half of our sample reported being second-generation immigrants, which I just want to note means that at least one parent was born in another country. And and more than 80% of our sample had at least a bachelor's degree. So we ran descriptive statistics, frequencies, correlations, and ANOVAs to check that we met the appropriate assumptions and determine significant demographic predictor variables for our multiple regression analyses. So we ran a hierarchical multiple regression to examine the impact of numerous predictors on depression, and you can see which measures we use specifically for each predictor here, or each variable. So for model 1, we entered the demographics, which included age, gender, and education. For step 2, we included the family stressors. For step 3, we added the 2 coping strategies, and then any significant interactions between the stressors and coping strategies were included last. And our outcome was depression, which was measured by the CESD. So for model 1, 2, and 3, they reached statistical significance, meaning that the overall set of demographics, family stressors, and collectivistic coping strategies accounted for a significant change in the variance in depression scores, and they accounted for a total of 37% of the variance in depression scores. But then when we added the interaction between intensity and family conflict, between the intensity of family conflict and forbearance in the last model, it did not lead to a significant change in variance, which you can see in this table here. We just highlighted model 4 since it was our last one. But in this model, you can see that age, intensity of family conflict, and forbearance were significant predictors. So overall, we found that like I said, the overall set of the demographics, family stressors, and collectivistic coping strategies accounted for a moderate amount of variance in depression scores, but forbearance did not have a moderating effect on the relationship between family conflicts and depression. So firstly, our results are also consistent with previous literature where they have found that both family stressors and forbearance are positively correlated with depression, but family support was negatively correlated with depression. So meaning that family support could be a protective factor related to depression, or lowering the levels of depression scores. And then, although forbearance may be a coping strategy Asian Americans use, the results suggest that it may not be the best way to handle family conflict, as suggested by that non-significant interaction between family conflicts and forbearance. So this is important for clinicians and future interventions, because it really emphasized that we need to focus on Asian American family conflicts and being able to manage such interpersonal relationships. So one thing that may be helpful is involving families in therapy and informing them of how their interactions are impacting someone's mental health, and specifically depressive symptoms. And we can also focus on addressing and decreasing forbearance, hopefully thinking of teaching more adaptive coping strategies. But that said, also understanding when working with our Asian and Asian American clients, understanding the underlying cultural factors contributing to that chosen coping behavior. So for future directions, we would like to have a larger sample to obtain a higher statistical power. And also, these particular collectivistic coping strategies did not affect these specific familial stressors. So future studies might want to look at investigating other collectivistic coping strategies and see if and how they address family stressors and their relationship with depression. All right, well, thank you guys so much.